Good evening, everyone, and welcome to We Survive Because We Love Each Other, a celebration of lifetime and long-term survivors. This signature PWN-USA event serves as both our official kickoff event for our 18th birthday campaign and a commemoration of the Long-Term Survivor Awareness Day. We are here because we chose each other, and I'm deeply honored to be joined here tonight by Rebecca, Alora, and Grissel, powerful women whose lives, leadership, and brilliance continue to shape our movement. And rather than reading their bios, I'd love for each of you to briefly introduce yourselves, and I would love for you to share what is bringing you joy right now. So, Alora, you first. What's bringing you joy?
Hot seat. Um, I live in the Pacific Northwest, and I am loving that the light is coming back. Those dark winter months are real dark. So we're getting light, we're getting greenery. I'm in the middle of moving to a new house in the same area, but it's a new house. So looking forward to that being completed. Loving on my babies. Those are the things that are bringing me joy right now. And then do you want a bio too? Is that what you were asking? Or what was the
Yeah,
other?
just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. I my name is Alora Gale. I am a lifetime survivor. I was diagnosed in 1992, but born in 85, December of 85. I live in the Pacific Northwest with my four kiddos and my lovely husband and our dogs. Um, yeah, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for being here, Laura. Grissel, I'm gonna pass it over to you.
Yes. I'll start with what's bringing me joy because if not, I'll forget later. What's bringing me joy, same. I love the long days and that I can go on a post-dinner walk with my family around the block. And so that's always nice. Just longer days. I love that. And next week I'm going camping in Big Sur with my family. So I am very much looking forward to that. I love a forest. And so I'm excited to spend a whole week amongst the trees next week. And a little bit about myself. So my name is Grissel Granados. I am also a lifetime survivor. I was diagnosed in 91, but born in 86. And I've known my status since I was 5 and have been part of this part of this community openly for really just as long. So I'm very happy to be here, and I live in Los Angeles. I have a 7-year-old kiddo, and 2 cats, and a loving partner.
And Grissel, for those who may not know, can you let us know what a lifetime survivor is?
Yes, a lifetime survivor is somebody who's been living with HIV their entire life, so really since birth or early childhood. And it is a term that was coined by the community itself, right? So another term that people may have heard of recently is also a dandelion. It's another loving term that the community, we came up with it for ourselves. Yeah.
Thank you, Grissel. Grissel is also our board chair at PWN too. Rebecca, I'm gonna pass it over to you.
What is giving me joy? The weather is giving me joy. Seeing all the events honoring our history is giving me joy. I get actually quite emotional and excited anytime I see dandelions speaking for themselves because back in the day it was their moms speaking for them because they were babies and toddlers who couldn't. And so now that folks are old enough to advocate for themselves, that gives me joy and it gives me joy to be here. Um, and yeah, those are a few things. And background, living with HIV 43 years, diagnosed whatever 7 years less than that is. Um, so since 1990, what's that? 36 years. Founder of World and um, mama to two twins. Yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for being here. I want to ask you all a question. When I first got diagnosed, it was 13 years ago, so I'm not quite yet a long-term survivor. However, I remember my diagnosis and I remember thinking my life had limits. So I would love to know from each of you all, when many people first learned about like living with HIV, especially in those early days, folks tried to convince folks that their futures would be small, limited, or even short. But survivors, us as survivors, continue to imagine more for ourselves. So I would love to know, what was your dream you once thought would never be possible after learning your HIV diagnosis? And how has that dream evolved over time? And Miss Rebecca, I saw you smile, so I'm gonna pass it over to you first.
So when I was diagnosed in 1990, nobody had to tell me my future was limited because we just knew. It was understood that if you had HIV, you were going to die. And a couple days after my diagnosis, the International AIDS Conference started in San Francisco, and ACT UP shut down the street. And my husband and I went to see what was going on, and they were chanting, "AIDS is a disaster, women die faster."
Mm.
And they were handing out information, and I read the information, and it said men died on average within 18 months of an AIDS diagnosis, and women died in 6 months. So I thought I had 6 months to live because I was uneducated. I didn't really understand the difference between HIV and AIDS. And my biggest sadness, my biggest loss, was not growing old with my husband, who's actually on this call, and that I wasn't going to get to have kids. And then the science changed. I got pregnant. I had twins. And 2 years ago, when they turned 28, it was like, wow, you are the age I was when I thought I was going to die. So it was almost like at 28, I didn't really get to dream what was ahead of me, but my children get to dream what's ahead of them. And yeah.
Wow, Rebecca, thank you. I remember hearing about your history for the first time, and I was so enamored with all that you've experienced and all that you've given to women living with HIV. So I just appreciate you in this moment for continuing to share your story. Grissel and Alora, when we first met, we were at the PWN Speak Up Summit in Myrtle Beach right before I told everybody that I was living with HIV. So if you all could speak to your younger selves as lifetime survivors, what would you tell yourself about the future? Either one of you can go first.
This one's tough. I mean, I don't think that I would believe just like everything that I've been able to accomplish. And not because I ever thought that my life would be limited. I actually think uh thanks to my mom, the most revolutionary thing my mom did was the opposite, right? Like we talk about like toxic optimism. I feel like, I'm actually got my mom has a lot of that. And so even as undocumented immigrants with HIV, my dad had just passed, like all of these traumatic things that happened. My mom's like, you're going to go to college. And to college I went. so, so but I think I was always a really like shy kid. And so I don't think I would have ever believed that I would be speaking on stages or being a community leader or things like that. So I think just, I don't know, I feel like I would just remind myself to have a little bit of the toxic positivity that my mom has and believe that all things are possible, just like my mom believes.
I need to have a call with your mama sometimes. Alora, same question over to you.
The toxic positivity, Grizel, sounds very familiar in our, and I think that that was kind of a theme. I think we held in my house, and my younger brother is also positive. He's 2 years younger than me. Um, and we held both, right? Like we held the balance and extremes of awareness of like I remember my mom knew that she was given 6 months. We were diagnosed in 92, and we were given like 2 years to 4 years. And so we had books around our house, as one does sometimes, that were like talking about mortality, like mortality with children, and talking about chronic illness with children and their own death and things like that was very much a part of it. But there was also this piece of like death is part of life. And so we just need to know about it because we are all going to experience it at some point. But also, you are in a body that's working really well for you and that's trying really hard to support you in this. So I had kind of the balance of extremes in that one. And I think it was interesting. I was with a group of other lifetime survivors about a week ago, which is always a sacred space. And we were talking about a similar question. And it was this piece of, for me, it felt like the horizon or the sunset kept getting moved, right? So I was diagnosed and I was also told when I was about 6 years old. And at the time, we knew there was kind of a blurry horizon over there somewhere of life expectancy. And then it got moved out to like 12 to 15. And then I remember thinking about 18 and losing a lot of people who were, at the time, my elders who were a few years older, around 18, and losing a lot of people at 21. And so then I thought of that, right? And it wasn't until I was probably about 30, so about 10 years ago, that I was like, oh shit, I'm gonna make it. Like, I have made it, right? And so I do think there's that piece of the horizon that moves. And so I can't different dreams and different imaginations have happened at each time, and awareness of just being where we are has always been a thread for me of just appreciating the moment that we get to be in. um, but yeah, now I'm like about those long-term savings. So it's, balance and extremes.
That seems to be a common theme, especially among long-term survivors. They're like, I didn't think I would be here this long. So what are we going to do next? Speaking of like survival and talking about like how survival isn't just about emotions, and or socially, it's also about our physical bodies. Many survivors have lived through multiple treatment regimens. I myself have been on like at least two, so I know you all have been on multiple. What do you remember about your earliest experiences with HIV treatment? Because I remember loathing that bottle. Like I remember hiding it, putting it away. I had some issues with like adherence for a really long time, and I hate that word. That's the only word I could think of it right now. But I remember just really loathing that pill bottle. So I would love to. I'm gonna pass it over to you, Miss Rebecca. What do you remember about like your earliest experiences with HIV treatment?
So I turned out to be a long-term non-progressor. So I went 27 years before my T cells dropped, under 400 and I started meds. Um, except when I was pregnant. When I was pregnant, I took AZT for 3 weeks. Um, but the thing was, I had watched, when I was diagnosed, my best friend's sister had AIDS and she had to take AZT at double what became the recommended dose every 4 hours. And so, like, every day. So never sleeping more than 4 hours, ever, 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 ever. And I was like, how can you survive that even without a virus? How can you survive that? And in the years that came, I watched people taking medications that were really toxic, really hard to take, really finicky. They might be on a combo where these had to be with food, but those had to be without food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it was like a full-time job, just the timing of medications and managing the toxicities of the medications. So, and I also know a lot of women who just said exactly what you said, Marnina, where they really resented their medications. They felt like it was this reminder of this problem in their life or this thing they were ashamed of. And so when I did finally start meds, I didn't want that to be my experience day in and day out. So my family threw a party. We had a party and we had friends come over and they wrote little messages that they stuck in little capsules and we had cake and we passed my meds around and people did blessings from like different faith backgrounds and stuff like that. So when I take my meds, it just reminds me that there are people who want me to live. And now that was really transformative for me. And in fact, one of the people who was there was starting a really difficult medication for another illness a couple of weeks after that. And she said, "Would you mind if I copied you?" And I was like, "No, I'll help you do it." So, um, yeah, that's my approach to it. If I got to take these things for life, then I wanted to be friends. Yeah.
I love that. And someone is quoting you in the comments about how beautiful it
Mm.
is that like people want me to live. People want me to be here and I deserve to be here for them too. Alora, same question. Like what was your experience, especially as like a young person accessing like treatment and medicine?
I was really lucky in the sense that I also didn't start like HIV meds with that first round of pediatrics. There's many of us who are lifetime survivors who were really lucky to have the experience of our body being able to manage without those medication for a little while, or being either there's a number of lead controllers or folks who their body is able to maintain a low viral load of their HIV without medication, or for those of us who are kind of slower progressors, I think is we're lucky to have. So I took AZT and 3 DC, I want to say, um, for maybe a couple months around 95 when my mom was dying. And I just remember throwing up. Like I was just the nauseous child. It was my identity. And at the time, it wasn't making enough difference. So, for whatever reason, my dad, my caregivers chose to discontinue that. And then I picked it back up again in 99-ish. And I remember DDI was part of that combination. We called it a cocktail, made it sound way more fun than it was. But that was part of that combination during the time, and then immediately got acute pancreatitis, and was hospitalized. And so for me, I love hearing Rebecca's experience of like blessing the medication and having this positive relationship with that. Um, because it's beautiful. And I think mine was very adversarial. I think I had that collaborative conversation with my virus. I think that it was kind of one of those things of like we are coexisting in this body, and so we need to have some love there in some way. But I never got that with my medication, and I love that story, Rebecca. So I experienced meds through teenage years, through like pregnancies, through all of these things. And there was a lot of, I don't know that I would think of it as shame, but a lot of distrust of the medication, a lot of dislike, and a lot of pain and discomfort associated with it. Because those were the years that side effects were so prevalent. And so with my HIV, I'm like, this doesn't hurt me on a day to day, but I know this bottle of pills is going to make me throw up 3 times before third period, right? In high school. Um, and now it is a much more copacetic relationship. We've kind of reached, my meds and I have reached a peace, and I only take them once a day. So it has been a journey. And I'm so grateful for them, and deeply appreciate having access to them. But it's been a journey of the whole span. And Grissel, I know, has some experiences, but also some really different ones. So I'm excited to hear her perspective.
Pass it over to you, Griselle.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, similar. I started, I don't even know exactly which meds. I started when I was like 6 years old. But it was only for a few months. Because my mom, I think, also just kind of questioned the toxicity of giving these medications to a young child. And so then she found a doctor at a different clinic that was like, oh, we're not necessarily starting kids. We're like, it's not a big deal. It's your decision if you don't want to have her on meds. And so then I wasn't on meds until I was 10. Unfortunately, it was because at that point I got cancer. And after the chemo, that just depleted my T cells. And then it was like a non-negotiable. I had to start meds. And so by then, it was already, I mean, the meds were getting better because this was like 2000. So it was already ARTs. But yeah, I remember being, a sixth, seventh grader taking 10 pills a day, which much better than the 90s, but like just for a kid to be taking that many pills. I think of like my kiddo now who like takes a pill, for other stuff. And it's like one pill and I'm like having to negotiate with him. And so this was actually maybe like a week or two ago when I had that like, oh my gosh, this is what like, like all of my peers like went through, like this is the experience that their parents went through of like, okay, let me negotiate with my 7-year-old how to take medication. And I think for me, because cancer is pretty intense and pretty scary, I feel like I was like, yep, I will take whatever you tell me to. So I was really compliant. And I think I always was until probably until I got to college and I was like, I just want to be a normal kid in college. I don't want to have to worry about like, okay, do I take my pills down to the cafeteria? Do I keep water in my dorm so that I could take it? If I take it, then I have to explain to everybody what it is. And so I think that was the first time when I started to like feel like I don't want to do this and have something that signals me as different. So I had a great provider who, you know, supported me in taking a break. And so I was all of my 4 years of undergrad, not on medication, was, you know, kind of doing well, was being monitored. And then afterwards, once I graduated, I chose to go back on my own. It wasn't something that my doctor like asked me to go back on, but I just knew that in the back of my mind, I was going to be worrying if this cold is going to lead to pneumonia and I'm going to die. Like I just felt like everything, like there's like a voice in the back of my head that's like, it's not going to be okay. Like, you know, you cannot risk this. You cannot risk a simple infection because it'll be dire. And so I chose to go back on and kind of like, you know, like felt power in that of like I'm making this choice, right? Because technically at the time my doctor was supportive of not being on it for those years, and I was grateful that I had my college years to feel normal, I guess, and to feel like same like I had autonomy over my body and that I had autonomy over how I navigated that.
It's so amazing how all of us have a different shared experience around medicine, like loathing it a little bit and then coming to like peace and terms with it. But we've all had like different experience around being non-progressors. Like some of you all are non-progressors. Some folks went off meds. Some people are like consistently have not stopped taking them. So it is so wild how we all have the same diagnosis, but different experiences around treatment. Speaking of treatment, around this time every year, it never fails, there's a conversation around a cure for HIV. And that comes up almost every time around Long-Term Survivor Awareness Day, especially during the summer times. So, what feelings does the idea of a cure bring up for you all personally? And how has the relationship to that idea of a cure kind of changed over time? Rebecca, I'm gonna throw this at you because I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Around the time I was diagnosed, the San Francisco AIDS Foundation had this campaign, and it was like this bright yellow sunflower, and it said, "Be here for the cure." And the idea was if you could just hold on for a couple of years, we'd have it. That was 1990. And at the time, they said you should start meds if your T cells drop below 500. And then a couple of years on, they said you should start treatment if your T cells fell below 350. And then they said, and then better medications came along, and then they said everybody should be on meds from the get-go. For me, I'm not just a long-term survivor, but I'm old. I'm 64. I have a bunch of comorbidities. I take medications for a bunch of other things. So for me personally, um, I'm okay not having a cure, but for us collectively, a cure would be awesome.
Mhm. It would be.
Yeah,
You
a
are
cure would
not
be
old,
awesome,
Rebecca.
but
You are seasoned.
yes, and yeah. But you know, uh, when my kids were 16 and the International AIDS Conference was in DC, they asked me if I was going to go. And at the time, I was really struggling with PTSD. I had left World and just kind of left HIV activism and stuff. And I was like, I can't do it. Everything triggers me and I can't do it. And so they said, well, what if we go? And so my kids went. And while they were there, they met Timothy Brown, who was the Berlin patient, the first person cured of AIDS. And I asked them, oh my gosh, what was that like? And they were like, Mom, he's really sick. And so it made me kind of stop and go, okay, being cured and being healthy are two different things. So yes, being cured would be great. But in that moment, I kind of said, I want to be as healthy as I can to live the fullest, richest, happiest life, to love the people around me as I can. And if that's cured, then that would be a miracle. And if it's not, it's okay. I'm going to be taking a lot of medications whether I'm cured or not. But for us collectively, for a lot of people, it's really, really, really important. And I want the people for whom it's really important to have it. And I would consider being in cure research for that reason. Um, Even though, when I started meds, it was an expectation I would do it for the rest of my life. And I just made my peace with that a long time ago.
Shout out to Timothy Ray Brown. Rest in peace to him. I was able to meet him about 2 years before his passing back in 2019 during USCHA. And I remember asking him, Rebecca, like, if you could do it all over again, would you? And he told me no, that it was so much pain that he wouldn't do it any, like he wouldn't take the stem cell treatment. And that was shocking to hear. And I'm gonna pass it over to you, Alora. What thoughts do you feel around an HIV cure?
When you first said that, the word that came to mind was exhausted. Um, I think the years of like getting excited and then letting down and then getting, and the work that has gone in that has not been my work, this work that I'm grateful for, and community hope that is tied to it, and that at times so much has ridden on it. It it has a different weight for different people and in different rooms, right? Um, and so for me personally, I feel very similar to Rebecca in that I more or less have functional treatment. I still get out my little like meds list every year that comes out, right? Like the folks make, whether it's all the folks do it, and we'll cross out the ones that aren't my options. I don't know if anyone else has this ritual. I stopped doing it for a long time and then looked at my genotype for 20 years ago that had a viral load and was like, oh, I have less options than I thought. And so, like, I make sure I've got my option and a backup option. And as long as I've got that, I'm good. My long-term side effects from the meds are nothing like they were in my youth, in my pregnancies, even. My youngest child is 12, so that gives a time frame of that. Um, I I also met Timothy and shared space with him, and I so deeply appreciate what he was willing to do to share the information, with the rest of us from the experience that he had, right? He chose to undergo a lot of additional research in order to try to replicate similar for those of us, and it had really strong implications for his health. And I am so grateful for what he gave all of us. And yeah, I don't know that balance, I don't know that that's worth it for me, at this point in time. I think the combination of knowing that if we have an undetectable viral load, we are unable to transmit HIV. I think that is huge. I think having medication that is stable, that has minimal long-term side effects, that is huge. And for me, that balance of those weights has kind of evened out where I'm at right now. Um, and yeah, I know a lot of folks that it would be life-changing, similar to injectable medication and longer-term medication being life-changing in their day-to-day. And for me, yeah, I've just kind of reached a balance.
I hear you, Allure, about those highs and those lows because I started thinking about who's going to disseminate this medicine, what communities are going to have access to it. Is it going to be available to women and cis and trans folks and gender diverse folks? Like, what does that look like in the dissemination process? So I definitely hear you. It sounds exhausting. Grissel, what about you when you think about like an HIV cure?
I mean, same. And I wonder if, I don't know if it's the same for most long-term survivors, but it is. I mean, I do think it comes for me from a place of privilege of I've been relatively healthy. You know, I've been able to again not feel limited by my status. I don't know, just like I have a very I I haven't really had that many negative outcomes from living with HIV, right, personally. And so I also answer the same way of like for me personally, like I'm not going to be the first in line to get it, like if it doesn't come, I'm still going to live my life kind of thing. But I also recognize just like yeah, like how world changing it is for a lot of people, right? And just like we're saying, like it's difficult to think about, like, I also go into the mechanics of everything that you mentioned, Marnina, right? Of like, well, what does it really mean, and what is it, what is the cost? I also think of like all of the things that are not being cured that we associate to be like due to HIV and are not, right? Like anti-Blackness is still going to be real, homophobia, transphobia is still going to be real. Like a lot of people's lives might not change, right? I think what might be eliminated, I feel like I saw quickly like a comment that said like, it might deal with some of the stigma. I also think there's consequences to, I think of for lifetime survivors, a lot of one of the things that we one of our existential questions is like, who am I outside of HIV? Who am I without it? Right. I think of that even for, people who are like HIV famous, right? Who like, actually, I've built a lot for myself, being an HIV advocate. And so then what happens when that gets taken away? Right. And like, I think there's a lot of things to consider, with a cure, not just even like the physical impacts, and all of that, but then, like how are we going to come together as a community, as people who once had HIV, right? Like is that our community? And I don't know, just it's so complex and complicated. And I think just from that standpoint of like who will be prioritized and all of that, I'm sure we're going to see the same thing as with PrEP, right? At first we're like, okay, there's an opportunity, we have a lot of lessons learned, and we saw the disparities like rise really quickly, right? And the same thing will happen with the cure, right? And so I know that I'm like, I'm not going to be first in line. I'm not, once it settles, then, maybe I'll look into it, but it's not something that I'm necessarily pressed for.
When you said you're not gonna be the first in line, I immediately thought about the injectable and how folks ran to get it. And I was like, oh, nope, not me. I don't want it. Even though it probably would make my life so much more simpler.
No, well, and actually that's a great example because, like, yes, I hate taking pills as much as the next person. Although, yeah, now in my 40s, I'm like, oh, I got to take supplements and vitamins now. And so it's no longer one pill once a day. But I actually thought of I get to see my doctor only twice a year. And if I got on the injectable medication, I would have to go more than twice a year. And I'm just not organized enough to do that.
No.
I'd rather have my little pill and take it. And yeah.
The way my ADHD is set up, I would forget to go to the doctor. And they'd be like, hey, you missed like 6 months. So you all, I love the fact that all of you all are mommies. One of the greatest lies that internalized stigma tells us as women living with HIV is that we no longer deserve like love and intimacy or building our own families. So when did you all first realize that you could still build a family and you could still have like this full intimacy, love life? And you could like live this full, beautiful life and be a mother. When did you all first realize that? And what was the moment that happened for you? Alora, I'm passing it over to you.
I think those were separate things for me.
Mm.
Realizing love and relationships and realizing parenthood and realizing like each of those were independent steps like of one another. I think they're on the same journey, but they were independent steps. And I think in a lot of ways I realized I was always fortunate to be really well connected with clinical trials and updates in science and have access to that knowledge. And so I think as a teenager, I realized that there were a lot of people around me, including people who are lifetime survivors who were having their children and were able to do it on their terms, whether that was adoption or giving birth or working through sperm washing at the time was a thing, right? Like there were so many different options. And that folks were empowered to do it, right? Who wanted to go through that path, that was an option. I think that many of us who are lifetime survivors also have had experiences around CPS, in terms of interjections in our care or worrying about how we're going to feed our children, whether it's from chest feeding and breastfeeding or for formula. And so there's always kind of an outside looming fear, at least for me and for many folks that grew up in that system of surveillance. And so I think each step of those of realizing we could do it and do it our way without having that looming was another level, right? Like there was all different stages to it. And then love and relationships, I think, is an evolving thing for me. I think that it's taken me longer to step into that wisdom than I would have liked. But I am deeply grateful for the relationships I have and I have had that have brought me there. And I think that HIV is one piece of it, but it also shades into all the other parts, right? Of who we are and how we look at our self-worth and our value and how we show up in the world and how we allow others to show up for us. Um, but yeah, I think that in a nutshell.
That's so true. Thank you. What about you, Grissel? When was the first time you realized like this family thing? Yeah, I could do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think because I was a positive kid, and like I knew I mean people with HIV were gonna have families no matter what, right? And um so I feel like I had a lot of examples of that, especially I think growing up with around women living with HIV. But and so for me, I chose to build my family through adoption. And part of it is like I feel like even though I adopted, like once I knew I'm like, okay, yeah, people can have kids who are HIV with HIV negative, but I still chose that route partly because I'm like, there's enough children in the world like who need families, and I have a home that I can open up. And the other part is I just had never had any desire to experience pregnancy or give birth. I felt like my body had already been through a lot, not just HIV, but right, chemo for cancer. I've had like other medical procedures in childhood that I'm like, I'm trying to put my body through that. And just yeah, like a lot of the women in my family have had like complications giving birth, including like why I'm living with HIV along with my mom, right, with like preeclampsia and hemorrhaging and all of that kind of stuff. So I just it wasn't something that I felt like I wanted to risk my life for, but I always knew that like I'm like, yeah, I want to parent, and I want to be able to raise a little human. And so yeah, it's been such a great experience to think of like what are all of the things that I learned through my experience as a kid growing up with HIV, that I think are going to be valuable in my parenting journey. And last year or 2 years ago, when my kid turned 5, I feel like I was really in my feelings because I was like, wow, I was that age when like my whole life changed. When, like when I was diagnosed, when I migrated to the US, when my dad died, like all of these things. And so I feel like I had a lot of empathy for little me of like, wow, and like my kid is 5, and and just kind of this is where I was developmentally and stuff. And so just it helped me reflect a lot on my own experiences as a parent. So I've really enjoyed that part of it, that opportunity to have insight into like what it was like for me at that age, even if our experiences are completely different.
And to like add on top of that, he's so cute. Your baby is so cute. Rebecca, what about you? When did you first like realize your journey into motherhood could be possible?
Um, so when I tested positive, when they told me your test is positive, you have HIV, the first thing I thought was, oh, I'm never gonna get to have a baby. And I knew I wanted to have kids. I'd been married to Dan for a year, but I would never have guessed that that would be the first thing that I would think. But that was the first thing that I would think. And that was the hardest part of the diagnosis. Like I made peace with like, okay, I'm going to die young. I made peace with that, but I never was able to get over just this yearning to be a mom. And so two things happened in 94, and one was the oh 07 ACTG 076 study came out showing that AZT cut transmission from like 22% to 8%. And around that same time, I enrolled in a study at the NIH of long-term non-progressors. And I didn't hear from them, which seemed weird. So I called them up and said, like, hey, what's going on? And they were like, yeah, well, we ran this test on some certain number of your leukocytes and we didn't get any signals. And I was like, okay, what's that mean? And they're like, we don't know. And I was like, well, do I still have HIV? And they were like, we don't know. So I've actually had the experience of wondering if I was cured um, for a week or two. And they were like, we're going to run tests on a couple more and get back to you. So when they got back to me, they said, you still have HIV, but you have a remarkably low amount of virus in your body. Like they were having to explain this whole new test called PCR because people hadn't really heard of viral load testing yet. That wasn't really a thing yet. So I went into denial and completely shut down and had to go into therapy and long journey of dealing with this psychological, like you would think you would go, oh my God, maybe I can have a baby. Yay. I did that for like 8 hours or something. And then I just fear just kind of shut everything down. I couldn't journal, I couldn't paint. And it took months to kind of come out of that. And when I realized that the shutdown was about that issue, I reached out to this clinic at San Francisco General Hospital that specialized in HIV pregnancies. And I called them to get some information, and they said, would you like to come in for preconception counseling? And I was like, that's a thing? You would do that? Like you would help me on this journey? Oh my God. And so we went in and we talked to them and they looked at my labs and they said, yeah, the risk wouldn't be zero, but the risk would be really low. And this was before U equals U, right? So long before. So they gave me like this little tiny syringe. I remember being like, wow, that's the smallest turkey baster I've ever seen. And they taught us how to do artificial insemination at home. And yeah, it was a whole thing. And of course, and I thought I had the most planned pregnancy of the world until my first sonogram. And then they were like, so twins run in your family? Yeah. So it was, we can't control everything. If HIV should have taught me that, but yeah. So yeah, and I made the decision to be really public. I mean, I wasn't going out looking for attention for my pregnancy, but I wasn't hiding it at all, which meant the media found me. Um, because I had that privilege, I had the safety to be open, I was executive director at World. My husband was supportive. Um, the people that mattered to me were supportive. Um, well, almost everybody that mattered to me was supportive. My mother was horrified, but anyway, um, yeah, so that was my journey. And one thing that was interesting after I had kids, or even after just I announced the pregnancy, I got calls from literally all over the world of women wanting to know um, how to get pregnant, how to get pregnant safely, how to, all this stuff. But I also got a lot of calls from men, and that was a real surprise. Straight men and gay men who wanted to be parents too. And it was actually harder for them to find a pathway to parenthood, biological parenthood, than it was for me. Yeah.
Rebecca, have you written a memoir yet? Your life is like a memoir. For real.
Yes, I have. Actually, I'm still editing it, but yes, I do have a full
Okay.
manuscript I'm working on.
I definitely want to read it. I'll be the first one in line. I want to kind of break up the monotony right now. If you could give every newly diagnosed person one non-medical survival tool while living with HIV, what would it be? I can go first while y'all are thinking, because I know this is a difficult one, a tough one to think off the fly, because I've been thinking about it. Mine would be pleasure. What I've noticed is that a lot of women living with HIV stop having sex. And they're like, I'm not doing that. I'm like gonna block myself from like having sex because of my diagnosis. And you have so many nerve endings in your clitoris alone. Utilize them. Sex should be pleasurable and you should receive all of the pleasure. And it is my survival tool. So I would love to know, Alora, if you could give a newly diagnosed person a survival tool, what would it be?
I love yours, Marnina. I love it so much and agree with it. I would add finding like your root of self-love. There's the amount of stigma that can come from within us, from externally, is massive. So finding that peace where you're able to be at peace with yourself, but also to just fucking love yourself is the biggest gift you can give yourself, particularly for someone who's HIV positive. And so with that comes easier drive to take your medication, like Rebecca was talking about, of feeling worthy and feeling wanting to be at peace with the medication and feeling more at peace in your relationship. I mean, it all just